way they're running, the 3-year-olds are up against it. This has to be a case of the 3-year-olds rapidly improving and the older horses taking a bit of a step back, and or a situation where Good Magic, some of these other horses, can come in and step up when asked to run a little bit faster against better horses and be able to sort of have that 7th gear. And so who can provide that? Right now, I think there's a lot of skepticism out there, and I'm certainly one of those people that has a little bit of a less kinder eye at these 3-year-olds, and that goes against what I've been saying about the sophomores of 2018, that they were going to be this kind of group that's going to be viable and could dominate the Breeders' Cup, and that still may happen. That still is certainly not out of the cards, but right now, things are looking a little bit suspect, and it's a case in point of this car needs some repairs. This is, we've got some structural issues going on because we just aren't so sure, even with all the Curlins in there and the sire power that he's had and the classic producing prowess that he has displayed as a stallion. Sometimes we, as I've said before, we get over influenced by pedigrees, and right now these 3 Curlins, with Good Magic being at the top, have a few clouds of suspicions. They're under the umbrella of suspicion right now, and as I said before, hence the multitude and the multiple $64 questions. So right now what we're looking at is, I think we're going to see a couple horses step up in distance, going up from a mile, 7 furlongs to a mile, or from a mile to a mile and an eighth, is something in the case of Mind Your Biscuits, who ran a very credible second to Diversify in a race in which there really wasn't a lot of opposing speed to the winner. Going a mile and a quarter might be a little bit more of a quantum leap for him, but it wouldn't surprise me if one of these horses that's been 9 furlongs, that hasn't had a lot of experience at 10, or maybe a horse, one of these milers, might want to jump up in distance. Mind Your Biscuits looks to me like he's progressively running better. He ran good in the Met Mile, he ran well here, and I think that maybe they might test the waters in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. Something tells me, though, in the end, for him, probably the sprint, the mile, is going to probably end up being the choice. But I think they did very well with what some people would consider an experiment, to send him a little bit further than the 8 furlongs, to send him around, a more routed 2-turn type of race. The Met Mile is at 1 turn at Belmont. So I think he did very, very well, and I think, even though the Jockey Club or even the Woodward coming up prior to it is not likely, I think that if he continues to run this way, we're going to see him, if he stays in training, you're going to see him in some spots where, he might be able, certainly a mile and a 16th is definitely, well within his reach, and I think a mile and an eighth, you might see him pop up in a race like the Stephen Foster next year. Could be a very good candidate for the Pegasus in January of 2019. That'll be near the Super Bowl weekend, and we don't know what the purse is going to be. We knew it was 16 in 2017. It was in 2018 earlier this year, and it was 12 million when Arrogate knocked off California Chrome. So it'll be interesting. I think he's one of those horses that's probably punched his ticket. He's shown he can go a mile and eighth, which is the distance of the Pegasus. As you know, I'm a bit of a purist, and I'm a believer in having more route races. The Pegasus should be a mile and a quarter, although it could be argued that early in the year. You don't want an Australian Open Grand Slam type of situation, high octane, that early in the year. As Roger Federer says, and I've always thought it should be played, within the first, in March rather than in January. You probably see much better performances and players that, couldn't make the time frame on after sustaining an injury to make it to the Australian Open that early in the year, especially after the Christmas holidays and all that. Not a lot of window to get prepared. Well, it's the same thing with the Pegasus. After the Breeders' Cup, there's not a lot of wiggle room. You're kind of bringing in horses off of works more than anything else. But we'll talk more about that as the calendar year progresses to that event. But right now, with the early forecasting, Mind Your Biscuits is a horse that has proven that he can, that I think he belongs in that race. Again, as I've said before, I think that the Pegasus should be a mile and a quarter, certainly should be a mile and 3/16. We don't even have a lot of top races carded at a mile and 3/16. The Pimlico Special has been on and off the conditions book for a number of years, and its fate, just like Pimlico and hosting the Preakness, has been a very, very shaky one. And that was one of the few top mile and 3/16 races out there, besides the Preakness itself, held at the same venue in Baltimore at Pimlico. Actually was held in many cases either the week before the Preakness Stakes or as in later years it was run on the Preakness undercard. So unfortunately, it would be nice if the Pegasus could at least get to a mile and 3/16. And we're going to talk more about pedigrees, distance, and this sort of prevailing attitude about how the breed and why some people even want to think that the Europeans are responsible for why we haven't produced superstars. But that's something we'll talk about a little bit more in conjunction with these top races coming up, the Breeders' Cup and so forth. But yeah, Mind Your Biscuits is a horse that's proven himself. Again, I don't know if he makes the Breeders' Cup Classic, but right now collectively the older horses are at an advantage right now. As I said before, somebody's going to have to regress the way that Lemon Drop Kid in 2000 as a 4-year-old had this great year, kind of sort of dropped off a little bit when nosing out Barons in the Woodward, and then Albert the Great, one of the improving 3-year-olds of 2000 in that great group. As I said before, Fusaichi, the Derby winner, hadn't had a lot of activity, and it caught up with him after he skipped the Preakness after he skipped the Belmont after being upset in the Preakness. And all of a sudden, these other 3-year-olds that he dusted off, either in the preps or in the Kentucky Derby itself, improved. And Albert the Great, who missed the Triple Crown races, came to hand during the spring and the summer, knocked off the Preakness winner Red Bullet. By the time he, after performing poorly in the Jim Dandy, after winning the Dwyer and beating some nice horses in there, including More Than Ready, who had finished 4th in the Derby, and the Preakness winner, as aforementioned, Red Bullet, ran poorly in the Jim Dandy, came back, lost by a nose to Unshaded in the Travers, and then ran second to Fusaichi in the Jerome, and then just dusted Lemon Drop Kid and a number of others in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, and ran the fastest 1.25 miles of any 3-year-old in the history of that race, or certainly one of the faster ones. I think it was 1:59 and 3 or 4, somewhere in that ballpark, and subsequently ran a very credible 4th in the Breeders' Cup Classic, nosed out by Captain Steve. And as I said before, all those 3-year-olds, Albert the Great, Captain Steve, that finished ahead of Fusaichi, as Lemon Drop Kid was sandwiched in 5th. Albert the Great, Captain Steve, and then of course the top 2, Tisnow and Giants Causeway, 5-time Group 1 winner by Stormcat, trained by Aidan O'Brien, came in there and switched from the turf in Europe to the dirt, had the pedigree to do it, but had the prowess, and as Aidan O'Brien so aptly described, they say this is a warrior's racetrack, Churchill Downs, and this horse is a warrior. And that's exactly what he was, a warrior. And he almost beat Tisnow in that race in the first of his back-to-back Breeders' Cups. But again, the older horses dropped off. And in 1999, the previous year, Barons was having that same kind of year that Lemon Drop Kid did. Actually competed against Lemon Drop Kid in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, a race won by Bob Baffert's River Keen, another horse who had come to hand later in the year. Subsequently, he ran poorly in the Breeders' Cup. But Barons, it took a long time, according to his trainer, Jim Bond, or James Bond as they called him, 007, for his horse to get on track. But that race just unglued Barons, and by the time he looked around at the Breeders' Cup, transmission, water pump, fuel pump, gone. No horse, no gas, no juice, So that, and that really kind of contributed to Cat Thief, of course, being able to win that race, although he was a surprise at 19-1 because not Captain Steve, but General Challenge, also trained by Bob Baffert. General Challenge and Stephen Got Even and Lemon Drop Kid were considered to be better candidates to contend in that race, but Cat Thief had been grinding all year. And again, a horse like that keeps on coming, that's what's going to happen here if these older horses are to be defeated. And again, the only way that really what seems to be the likely scenario, or the scenario that's going to help these 3-year-olds, is somebody's going to have to regress. Diversify's run back-to-back 110 speed buyer speed figures in the Suburban at 1.25 miles and the Whitney at the 1.8 mile distance. Again, we just don't know if he can carry that form to New York. That's what I'm curious. I mean, outside of New York, we're going to see if he can, if he can carry his racetrack elsewhere. And, the same could be said about Accelerate, but right now these older horses are looking good. And keep in mind, what's really, really striking is the fact Bob Baffert has not run West Coast since the Dubai World Cup, and he's not run Collected either in quite some time. So what's the game plan? Are we looking at a late surge? I mean, do they come to New York to run in the Gold Cup or the Woodward? Are they going to pop up the week after the Travers? Are we going to see them in the Awesome again? Somewhere in there between these two horses, there has to be at least a prep, unless he plans on training these horses up to it. But right now, the 3-year-olds have got to basically elevate their game a little bit in order to really have a viable chance, or they have to hope for the older horses to go to sleep. So that's what's going on. The buyer speed figures, the Jim Dandy, 93 collectively by Tenfold, Flame Away, and Vino Rosso. Flame Away probably doesn't go in the Travers. He'll probably cut back in distance and run in what used to be called the King's Bishop and the Allen Jerkins. Well, he'll probably face Promises Fulfilled, another one of Justify's victims who ran head-and-head with the Triple Crown winner in the early stages of the Kentucky Derby. Really hasn't been the same horse, at least after that Kentucky Derby run, since he had won the Fountain of Youth, or since he was, viable earlier in the year. The Fountain of Youth was won by Flame Away, excuse me. But since the Florida Derby where he got roasted, Promises Fulfilled had stepped back. Now, off the Amsterdam, the prep for the Allen Jerkins, it's going to be very interesting between him and probably Flame Away. What happens there? We know Promises Fulfilled is a go on Travers Day for that race. But again, Vino Rosso, the third place in the Jim Dandy behind Tenfold, sandwiched in between Tenfold and Flame Away, comes in the Travers. As I said, 93 buyers are not something that really moves the teletimer, lights up the tote board, makes it doesn't create the type of buzz of earth-shattering and death-defying proportions right now. So that's what you're looking at with these 3-year-olds from the Jim Dandy. That's a disturbing number that has to improve drastically to catch up with Good Magic's 98, which by no means is scintillating in and of itself. So as I said before, this is not stuff that shifts, makes the continent shift, or like I said, creates something that blows up the Richter scale. These horses are going to have to improve, and as I said in the earlier post Curlin, Haskell, and Jim Dandy recaps, somebody from the outside, the outsider has an opportunity to invade or come in. It's either going to be one of these 3-year-olds going to step up, just like, when we go into the Triple Crown. Somebody has a chance to be a star, or we're going to get mediocrity. So we're either going to have that, or we're going to have a stark, improvement, or some new horse is going to come in here. And that new horse right now, the hopes that some would have, that Bob Baffert would have McKenzie ready, the son of Street Sense, who got injured, prior to the Santa Anita Derby, which, was really what kicked off this whole Justify, super, califragilistic magic funky carpet ride to the Triple Crown. By getting injured, he was supposed to go to the Arkansas Derby, Justify, and McKenzie sustained an injury, and that, of course, Bob Baffert decided to keep Justify, local, and run, on the home track, and we all know what happened. His dizzying ascent to greatness began right there when he smoked Bolt d'Oro in the Santa Anita Derby. But McKenzie was going to be a major player, at least on paper, based on the sham, and based on his win over Bolt d'Oro in the San Felipe in the lead up to the Santa Anita Derby. He was disqualified in that race, but we know that disqualified, number taken down or not, the quality of his performance was leading everyone to believe he was going to be a major player. And right now it looks like he's not going to have an opportunity to come out and show his stuff in the Travers. That's the way it would appear. Gronkowski's going to come in, even with all the inactivity off of works, into the Travers, according to all the reports. But it looks like McKenzie, if I had to choose, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a stake race. It could easily be a conditions race. But obviously, if you want to look at the stakes in and around this time frame, the Pennsylvania Derby would seem to be the place that he's. But right now, Bob Baffert has been hibernating with some of his best horses, as I aforementioned, West Coast and Collected, and McKenzie. Maybe there is an issue, but he did say upon announcing Justify's retirement that McKenzie looks really good. But he didn't. Bob Baffert's one to kind of go by the seat of his pants and play it by ear. So running in the Travers is something that I would be, at this point, usually somewhere, at the 11th hour, Bob Baffert makes an announcement. And obviously, a lot of times it's, a prep race. And so we haven't seen McKenzie compete. So my guess is going to be, I would be hard pressed to convince it to convince me that he would be going in the Pennsylvania Derby off of preps. So it's going to be very, very intriguing as to what he's going to do with his horses. Dale Romans, of course, has the West Virginia Derby winner. We'll talk more about him in the next piece in the build up to the Travers. But right now, the most interesting development is how these older horses right now, when it comes to forecasting races like the Jockey Club Gold Cup on the East Coast, the Pacific Classic on the West Coast coming up right in and around the Travers, and then looking at events like the Awesome Again, which is also going to be run at Oak Tree at Santa Anita, and so forth. And then in juxtaposing that against the 3-year-old races, the Travers, the Pennsylvania Derby, right now it is looking very, very good for the older horses. But again, it's early still yet. A lot of things could happen, and we're going to talk more about a lot of those things and what's going to develop on CS Racing